Hey, so as I said, I was going to dedicate a video to Yogg, Hope's End, one of my favorite cards. First, let me quickly gloss over what the nerf is. I talked briefly in the other video, but let me hit that real quick here. The nerf to Yogg isn't anything pertaining to his card effect. His card effect is staying the same. It's casting a random spell for each spell that you've cast this game. But there is actually a ruling or interaction change with this. When Yogg dies, is silenced, is polymorphed, anything like that, taken off the field, returned to your hand, when that happens and he's no longer on the field in his form, the spells will stop. And I think that makes a lot of sense, especially based with the interaction that he has currently in the game with Sylvanas, where if he kills Sylvanas in the midst of his spells, the opponent takes the Yogg and the spells become theirs. So based off of that kind of logic, you would think if he kills himself, then he cannot cast the spells any longer. But I think that that's a really disappointing fact, because if he came out that way, and that was the way he was from the beginning, players would accept it. But so far, we've been playing with Yogg in the format where the spells just go crazy. You can stack up as many spells as possible in your deck, and you just play Yogg and see what happens. The problem here is that a lot of players would complain about the RNG factor that Yogg has. If Yogg casts enough spells and he gets them right, you can just kind of win the game. And if he gets bad spells, maybe you just lose the game. I think that this nerf is somewhat bigger than people think to him, and really is going to push him in only the for fun play mode. I would say somewhere between the 5 and 10 spell range is where Yogg usually dies. And the thing is, Yogg himself isn't exactly a hard minion to kill. He's only a 7/5. Now, if he buffs himself, I understand that he becomes a much harder minion to kill. What I would propose as a nerf is that I would say they should have made it so that Yogg can't be affected by the spells he plays. And I know that sounds a little crazy in certain situations, like if you get a Doom, let's say, and it clears the whole board and leaves Yogg remaining. I mean, that is extremely powerful. But that's kind of just like you taking the RNG chance to play a Brawl and then winning. I mean, it's a little more powerful than that, but it should be a lot more powerful than that, because Yogg is a 10 mana card. I think maybe if Yogg had that kind of text, where he always remained alive, but he couldn't be affected by his own spells, your opponent can easily deal with a 5 health minion, most likely. It doesn't have charge, it can't attack this turn because it's not going to cast any spells like that on himself. I mean, I've gotten Yoggs before that are given charge and Wind Fury, and then I just kill my opponent that exact turn. That's actually not fair, and I agree with that. But if Yogg just remained alive and had a chance to wipe the rest of the board, I mean, then you're kind of playing like a RNG style Deathwing. I mean, Yogg is kind of already like that, but not exactly. I mean, Yogg can be totally disastrous for you. He can, play Astral Communion and just discard your whole hand of cards, whatever you had there that you were willing to maybe risk by playing him, but he could just totally discard your hand. They didn't just increase his deltas, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about RNG, basically breakpoints, where the card can be the absolute worst and where the card can be the absolute best. They didn't just increase the range on either side, they actually just decreased his power immensely. With the Yogg we have now, post-nerf, you could potentially play Astral Communion, lose your whole hand, and then just have Yogg fireball himself, and then your turn's over. I mean, the downside of this new Yogg is basically so immense that he's a total detriment and risk to potentially play. Now, that is the absolute worst case scenario. More likely than not, that's not going to happen on your average game. On your average game, Yogg might be more or less the power he is now if you play, say 10 spells. He'll probably, kill some things, draw a couple cards, whatever, and then kill himself somewhere in there. It just doesn't feel as good because the effect of Yogg changes. You expect Yogg now to be a card that you play, and you're not even really caring about the body itself. at least I don't. You're just carrying, cast me a ton of spells, let's go, see what happens. And he's never going to be that crazy anymore. You're never going to play Yogg with Bran because he's going to kill himself for sure before you even get to the second set of spells. So that's the kind of stuff that I find a little concerning when they change a card like this. I want to talk about RNG though, because this all stems from a discussion about RNG within the game itself. RNG is an interesting aspect of Hearthstone. As an avid card game player coming from Magic and Yu-Gi-Oh primarily, every card game has RNG in it. It is literally the essence of the game. You have a deck of cards, and you don't know what the next card is, unless you're cheating, and you don't know what the next card is, so that's your RNG right there. You shuffle the deck, and you hope to draw the cards in the optimal order. Because of this, card games adapt various things like, having a bell curve to your deck, because you want less little minions, more mid minions, and less high minions. So that way, at least you have a better percent chance to get the right cards. The other type of RNG is in other card games, you actually need more resources than you do in Hearthstone. Hearthstone, you're given 1 mana every single turn. In Magic, you have to draw your mana. In Yu-Gi-Oh, you have to draw the lower monsters or the special summoning conditions to bring your monster out. In all these other card games, you do have to have certain conditions to meet in order to play your cards. But in Hearthstone, you are given mana each turn, so that's actually a big amount of RNG taken out. Other card games that are physical could implement this as well, but it's easily implementable in a digital card game like this. But where the digital card game brings a new perspective and new aspect into it. So there's cards in physical card games that can let you reveal the top card of your deck and special summon it if it's a monster, let's just say. And that's kind of RNG as well. But Hearthstone does it totally differently and in a really fun and amazing way. If you look at cards like Tuskar Totemic, for example, Tuskar Totemic has an RNG effect where he gets a special summon a monster. And it doesn't have to be a monster from your deck, it doesn't have to be a monster from your hand or anything like that. It just pulls it out of thin air. And that is the interesting and amazing fact of being a digital card game. You can pull cards out of thin air, cards you might not even own, for example. I think as a player, we need to kind of embrace that as part of the game. Now, there's definitely points where RNG can go too far, such as Tuskar Totemic, which is why it got a nerf the way it did. Cards like Totem Golem are just too strong if you happen to roll the dice on that one. But I want to talk about a few different types of RNG cards in Hearthstone, and what is good RNG here and what is bad RNG for this game. A better example of RNG cards is something like Animal Companion. The RNG feels more comparable to the mana cost, and I think that's what's important here. Another example is a card like Ysera. And overall, Ysera can net a lot of value. And the thing that Ysera does as a high cost card is it forces your opponent to deal with her. If not that turn, but the turn after. Because she's going to generate so much value every single turn. Another high mana card, though, that has a different style of RNG is Ragnaros. Now, Ragnaros is interesting because in some situations, you don't actually need to deal with it. It's an extremely powerful card, and you want to deal with it. It's 8 mana, it should be powerful. But you don't need to deal with Ragnaros necessarily. Sometimes you could just summon a bunch of little minions and hope for the best and hope that it hits them instead of your big minion or instead of the face. But maybe your opponent has 7 health left and you're hoping that Ragnaros misses the 2 minions and just hits your opponent in the face. You just have a chance to win 1 in 3. And 1 in 3 is actually really significant chance to just play a card, finish the game. Boom, 1 in 3 chance. That's actually pretty significant. And even if he doesn't hit face, he's still going to do something really beneficial and kill half of your opponent's minions in that scenario. One more example, though, of RNG I just wanted to kind of bring into the mix is Arcane Missiles. I think Arcane Missiles is a good example of a cost to value ratio. It feels like you're getting 1 mana worth of RNG, no matter how you look at it. And that's the comparison overall that I want to make. The mana in Hearthstone is extremely important because I don't actually feel like we have a lot of 10 mana cards that are truly worth it. With the release of the Old God cards, they are quite the feast or famine type of cards. Previously in the game, the only real, true game-swinging card we had was Deathwing. If you felt like you were in a position of either desperation or in a position of so much, ahead that you could sacrifice your hand, you could potentially play Deathwing and clear the board, have a 12-12 down, and win the game in just a couple of turns. Deathwing was and still is played in decks. So when you say, oh, a Deathwing has an adequate cost for its effect because you have to sacrifice your hand, I would say what you're actually paying for there is no RNG. You're paying because Hearthstone in a lot of ways has RNG taken into it. You are paying for something that is consistent. This card will kill all minions. Doesn't matter if there's divine shields. It will kill all the minions on your opponent's side of the board. That's that, and you play your Deathwing. So you're paying a hefty cost for consistency. With Yogg, on the other hand, we're faced with a different situation. Yogg is 100% RNG. It is the most RNG card in the game. Everything about Yogg is random, and that's the point, right? The point of Yogg is to be totally random, and at the 10 mana cost point, it makes sense. I mean, if you look at Warlock cards like Twisting Nether and Doom, you can see the big difference in value of that 2 extra mana you have to pay. Twisting Nether is an 8 mana card that clears the board, and that's it. Doom is a 10 mana card that clears the board and draws you 1 card for each card that was destroyed. Doom and Twisting Nether both are guaranteeing you something. Yogg guarantees you nothing. And I get that it feels bad when you're in a winning position and you play against a Yogg and the Yogg clears your board and somehow he's left up and you just feel like, well, I lost the game because my opponent played Yogg and they got lucky. Sometimes you do win card games just because you get lucky. How many times has your opponent played a fresh weapon after using his final attack with the previous weapon and you happen to just draw a Harrison Jones that turn? The expression top deck is what it means for a reason. You're top decking a lucky card that helps you win or get some immense advantage. It's exactly what you needed. Yogg is his own top deck. When you play Yogg, you have a chance to essentially top deck and just get a lucky scenario out of it. Now, what happens when you play Yogg and it actually screws you over? Let's just assume not going to play Yogg when you're winning. But let's say you play Yogg when you're behind, and it still screws you over. I wouldn't feel too bad about it because I acknowledge the risk that I'm taking when I actually play Yogg. And my opponent won't feel that bad about it, well, because they're still winning. My opponent is going to say that was a fair Yogg because the Yogg did not kill their minions, did not gain me a board advantage, so therefore they're going to say I was winning, and I'm still winning after you played Yogg. The only time anyone is really frustrated with a Yogg is when it does a board reversal. But quite frankly, Deathwing can provide that same kind of influence, really. Yes, at the cost of your hand, but you're paying the cost of consistency. So you're basically paying 10 mana to have the absolute largest range possible of effects in this game. And I think in a game like Hearthstone, where it's very hard to get power swings, not too many cards in this game offer you large power swings. In the form of board clear or tempo switches, I guess. Not many cards offer this, and a card like Yogg being absolute random and RNG, I think can be embraced in a game like Hearthstone. And I don't actually think it's that bad if a lot of top tier decks have to play a card. That's kind of how card games work. I wish that in future development, cards like this need to be implemented. In Yu-Gi-Oh, there was a card called Stardust Dragon. And the effect of Stardust Dragon, as you can see here, is essentially that when your opponent plays something that would destroy 1 or more cards you own, you can tribute the Stardust and it will negate that effect. This is kind of a card that it gives an example of a countermeasure. So maybe in the next update, after a crazy card like Yogg would be released, you could have a card that was, if you had 2 or more minions destroyed by an opponent's card effect, then summon this guy. I think there's other ways to approach it via additional card design or via just waiting for things to rotate out than actually nerfing it. Because I believe that the power level of Yogg is actually balanced to his mana cost. Nothing in the game is going to cost more than 10 mana because you can't go above 10 mana. So for 10 mana, that should bring out your most powerful effects. And in a card like Yogg that is all about RNG, all about taking a gamble, it should be widely variant. Now, that said, I can understand why in tournament play you might not want to see a card like Yogg. I think tournament play could also have its own ban list that could be implemented. I think things like this would allow the game to be more flexible, more enjoyable, and overall more consistent throughout the years, and it wouldn't nerf the cards that you love or nerf the decks that you love and enjoy. But overall, Yogg being one of my favorite cards, I'm sad to see it nerfed, but I'm definitely excited for the future of Hearthstone, and I hope that Blizzard keeps producing RNG cards. I am so ready to embrace that aspect of this game, and I hope everyone else is as well.